Welcome to the Weaving Magic podcast,
where we discuss the different ways to weave magic throughout your daily life.
We are your hosts, Alyssa Lilly
and Tara Webb,
and we are thrilled to guide you in this magical journey of exploration and ritual.
Hello, and welcome back to the Weaving Magic podcast. I am your host, Tara Webb.
And I'm your host, Alyssa Lilly.
And today we have a fabulous queen with us, Dr. Justine Lemos, and we met her in RGG, and we're just really excited to get into what she has to talk about and share with us. But before we even get there, we would love to know, how do you weave magic into your daily life?
Thank you for inviting me to be on your beautiful podcast. I'm so happy to be here and honored. And I love that question. And I think the way that I weave magic into my daily life, one of the ways is through working with ritual. I work with ritual process almost every day, working with specific ritual pujas. And then in terms of working with plant magics and working with herbs and spices, kind of in cooking and cooking magic. I also do a very specific type of ritual called havan or homa or yagya, a very specific type of Vedic fire ritual that is one of my just favorite things to do. It's a fairly elaborate ritual, so I only do it a few times, probably a month. And certainly there are very complex yagyas that priests train in India for years and years and take many, many days to do. This is a simplified yagya that I've been initiated into, and that I do yagyas for myself and for clients and for particular astrological alignments or for particular global alignments. But those are some of the ways that I weave magic into my daily life.
I would love to hear more about yagyas. Is that how you say it?
Yagya. Yeah.
Yagya.
Mm-hmm.
That's beautiful.
They're also called, yagyas are done in ritual context, and then the havan or homa are smaller fire rituals. And it's done in a copper vessel. So a square, kind of upside down pyramid, with the top being wide and the bottom being not all the way pointed. You know, if there's a flat bottom, that's copper. And then it's graduated. It has 3 different levels, and these 3 different levels represent the 3 gunas, the 3 great qualities of tamas, which is inertia, and rajas, which is transformation, and sattva, which is purity. And so we build the fire using very specific wood that represent the planetary energies. And then with mantra and with ritual, we light the fire using camphor and using ghee in this kundal. It's called the kundal. Kundal itself means pit, and it shares a word root with kundalini, which of course you may have heard of.
Love.
Kundalini, not just the Kundalini yoga made popular in the US, but the whole concept of Kundalini. And so like Kundalini that rises through the inner body of the aspirant, of the devotee, of the yogini, the kundal takes the raw material of the wood, and then the fire rises up. And so while the fire is burning through the ritual process, we're chanting mantras into the fire, sound current into the fire, and then making offerings of what we call samagri. And samagri is this wonderful mixture of Ayurvedic spices and herbs and plants, and it just smells really potent and wonderful. And as you chant the mantra, you're making offerings with each mantra chanting into the fire, swaha, swaha, swaha. Take this, and it moves out and up and into the space. And the effect of yagya, it's very, very purifying. It shifts energy, it shifts stuckness really quickly. And so sometimes we'll do it every night in a particular cycle, or we might do it monthly like that. So those are yagyas. Yeah.
That's beautiful. I'm getting chills. I need to do this in my life.
Yeah, it's really amazing. It's not widely practiced. It's something that I offer when appropriate with my clients or with my group programs, and even online when we do yagyas. Like there is this transference of energy and this deep purification that happens through the yajna of just being with the fire and being with the mantra and offering into the fire. And then if you're doing it in a group, you all sit around the fire and you're offering samagri into the fire and with the mantra over and over. And you get very much into a very trance-like state as the fire is burning. And the only things in very complex yajnas, they'll feed the fire all sorts of things. But in the yajnas that I do, they're quite simple, and we're just feeding the fire ghee, clarified butter, camphor at the beginning to start it, and then samagri. We also will do things that is a traditional process where we do offer written intentions into the fire at specific moments, or things that we're releasing, into the fire at specific moments that were just like swaha, take this, swaha, breath, self, life, energy, transform, transform, transform. And so we can see similarities between so many different rituals cross-culturally. I mean, this is something that I study and am very interested in, but then there's also unique patterns within each. So yajna it's very, very beautiful. I definitely recommend, if you ever have a opportunity to sit in yajna. And I'll go so far as to, for some of my clients, because I'm also trained as a Vedic astrologer, which is a separate science from Ayurveda. But we'll have clients where you tell them, okay, you need yajnas done by priests in India for 9 days, and you're going to pay some money. And these people across the ocean will be sitting and doing ceremony, will be doing ritual for you. And it feels kind of like, what am I paying you? But the results for shifting energy and for shifting the mindset is really profound. So there are different kinds of ways to access yajna.
I love that you have the knowledge with Vedic astrology as well. That's something I've been wanting to dive into more. And it definitely is more intense than Western astrology as far as like reading the charts for those who are listening. It's not just, it's very much, the tilt of where our planet is now versus it being fixed for Western astrology. And so if I'm trying to think of the question that just left my head, but how would you say you got involved with this kind of practice as well as with Vedic astrology? And I know that's like with Ayurveda, the typical path is, becoming a counselor and like that kind of thing. Where did you end up diving into different spots, right?
So around more than 25 years ago, I began studying classical Indian dance with my guru, a form called Odissi from the east coast of India. And I studied very intensely with her and actually performed professionally in classical Indian dance for many, many years. And it was through this practice and study of dance that suddenly, without intending, I became really familiar with all of these concepts without even really knowing that I was learning these concepts. Suddenly, the gods and goddesses of the pantheon were very familiar to me. I knew all their attributes, maybe not all their attributes, but I knew who they were in a very intimate way because I had been learning to embody them and embody their mudras and embody their gestures. And so all this knowledge came into me. And during that time, my guru wanted me to go to India. I'd been many times, but she wanted me to go to India to study a different form of dance. And I was like, okay, how am I going to go live in India and study another form of, like, that's not like fine for like not a mind problem. Like I had no problem being open to that, but there was no way that financially I felt like I could just like go live in India. And actually, I was granted a Fulbright grant during my first master's degree to go do research on dance in India. And so then through that Fulbright grant, I had the ability to just go live in India without worrying about finances. And I mean, I wasn't wealthy. Fulbrights are quite slender. At the same time, my plane ticket was paid for and I had a stipend. And so it created this sense of, kind of ease. And so I was living in India and studying a form of classical Indian dance. And it was at that time when we were living in Kerala, and South India is a place in Kerala where much Ayurvedic knowledge has really been preserved. And so we became friends with a young man who his father was the first Muslim Ayurvedic pharmacist in India, which is quite unusual because usually Ayurveda is held by Hindu society, but Kerala, there's a lot of interweaving. And so because of our friendship with this young man, we would go to their pharmacy in the rice paddies and hang out. It was like very pleasant. It was more cool. And there were coconut palms, and like there'd be women sitting in the pharmacy, like around the fire, cooking up brews and rolling little pills. And I had no idea what they were. And they'd always show us their huge spice box, and we'd smell the spices. And I became aware, I kind of knew there was this thing called Ayurveda, but I really became aware that like, oh, there's this whole system of preparing the vessel. And I feel like, so much is, I don't want to say lost, left out maybe of modern Western postural yoga, but part of the preparatory process of like a deep yogic path is to get your body ready to contain and hold the various energies that will be ignited in the practices of pranayama, of asana, of deep meditation, right? Of ritual. And I myself had some chronic health issues, imbalances that weren't really addressed by Western medicine. And so went back to the US, and then I was given another grant to go back to India and live there again for an extended amount of time. And so then I was like involved a bit more in Ayurveda. And it wasn't until I came back to the US and actually I had my kid, and suddenly I was like, oh my God, I've got to take care of another person's body. Heck. Like, especially when they're little, I mean, you're not thinking as much about their mind because their mind is, I mean, you are, but you aren't. And I was like, oh man, I wanted a system. And Western herbalism, it probably, it isn't generally taught as systematically as Ayurveda is. Like it doesn't have that kind of paradigm of a philosophy like Chinese medicine does or like Ayurveda does. Nothing against Western herbalism at all. It's just like that. I wanted that philosophy of like A comes after B and then C, like what is happening. And so it was that at that time, after my doctoral studies, that I began to pursue becoming a clinical Ayurvedic practitioner, which is a bit different than some of the other kinds of trainings. And so that's the long circuitous pathway that brought me into Ayurveda. And because I'm like, dive into one thing really deeply, and then there's like, oh, this, and there's this system of Vedic astrology. What is this thing? And actually it was in my training that my teacher, who is a Western MD, an Ayurvedic doctor, and a Chinese doctor, he would always look at the Jyotish, the Vedic astrological chart, for every case we would do. And so we were learning about Jyotish. It was actually, to me at that time, it was a little bit overwhelming. I was trying to learn Ayurveda, and then there was all this other information. And so I kind of like, I got it to a degree, but then it was even after that I was like, oh, now it's time to really dive into this system. And like you said, I mean, it is a tremendously complex system that one needs, I think, several lifetimes to study.
I would love, since we've talked about, and as you say, Ayurveda and Vedic astrology. So whenever you were looking at Ayurveda, you were trying to begin to understand what it was about and what it even is. So can you kind of explain in that way of, if someone were to ask you, well, what is Ayurveda and why is it important to me? Like that kind of thing.
Absolutely. So, Ayur means life and Veda means knowledge or science. And so quite literally, Ayurveda is the knowledge of how to live a good life. How to live a good life, not necessarily morally, but like how to feel good. And I get really sad when Ayurveda is presented or understood as like a strict system of rules that people then shame themselves with, because that's not really at all what it's about. And it's much, much deeper than a specific diet or even a specific daily routine or a specific seasonal routine. It's really a blueprint for, it points to enlightenment, just like all of the Vedic sciences point towards the same direction, really. And so, of course, the knowledge of the doshas has become very popularized in the West. And I'll talk about what those doshas are, what we mean by those doshas, but it's just one tiny sliver of the huge knowledge of it's an important part. It's absolutely an important part, but it's not the only aspect of Ayurveda. And how it's become, like, people use it like, what's your sign, baby? Like, what's your dosha? Like, I am this, and so therefore this means this knowledge about me that's very important to reify my ego self. And that's not really like what it's about. So the knowledge of Ayurveda is based upon the knowledge of the Pancha Mahabhutas. Pancha means 5, actually comes into English as the word finger. We have 5 fingers, and it has the same etymological root as like word root as finger. It's how we get our word finger. So Pancha means 5, and Bhuta means element. So 5 great elements, and those 5 great elements or building blocks of the universe, as per Ayurveda, are earth and water and fire and air and ether. And the ancients noticed that these 5 great elements tend to combine in certain ways over and over again. Earth and water very easily come together. We see earth on the bank of the river. We see earth and water come together in the spring as mud. We see things growing out of the earth when water is applied. Fire almost stands alone, but then there's a little bit, it can get a bit sweaty. You know, when you're in the tropics and you're exercising or something, it's like fire, but it's wet fire, a little bit of wet fire, right? Not too wet. If it gets too wet, then there's a problem. And then air and ether gather together quite naturally. And always the question is, what is ether? It's the sound, it's the space through which sound travels. Those are very like light and very dry. And so these combinations of the 5 great elements come together to make what we call the doshas. Water combined with earth create what we call kapha dosha. And everything in the universe will have more or less qualities of each of these doshas. Fire coming together with a little bit of moisture we call pitta dosha, and then air and ether coming together we call vata dosha. Each one of us has a unique ratio of these doshas that is has its meiosis when the sperm and the egg meet. When the sperm and the egg meet, then your doshic blueprint is formed in part from your genetics, what came before you, but also like, is it a hot, sweaty night in, you know, Hawaii when your parents are getting it on and they just ate Thai food, right? There's going to be some fire in you as per the knowledge of Ayurveda, right? And so we're born, we have our own unique blueprint. And then because we have this wonderful ability of free will, and our intellect can make so many interesting mistakes, like cows don't eat pizza at midnight. They can't. They only eat grass. And when they are full, they stop eating grass, for example. You know, like cows don't do crystal meth. It's just like not... right? It just totally doesn't happen. No judgment. Like, I'm the most non-judgmental practitioner in the world. I'm always like, that's really could be very vata provoking that crystal meth you're doing. Like, that's going to dry out your tissues, probably cause some insomnia, right? Anyhow, sorry about my diatribe. So we're born, and then because we get to make these wonderful mistakes, messy mistakes along the way, we create imbalances. And those imbalances really what is overlooked in like the yoga journal quizzes that people do is that how we become imbalanced is really more important than what our original constitution is, right? Mm-hmm. You can be a kapha dosha person and have a kapha dosha grounded body, and you can have a huge vata imbalance, especially in this modern world. And so as a clinical practitioner, I'm always evaluating what is the imbalance. I do that via 7 layers of the pulse. I do it even at a distance. I do it through tongue. I do it through face analysis. I even do it through voice analysis, like what is happening in the qualities of the voice, and to create an understanding of what is the imbalance, how did the imbalance come to be, and then what remedies can we take on from the most cosmic level down to the very physical level to create more balance in this individual, more balance, more bliss, not just like more balance, like I can never eat this and I can't eat that because it will rupture my balance. It's like more blissful, easeful balance in this individual person.
Mm-hmm. I love how you explain that, because I feel like the one thing that I used to get caught up on with Ayurveda was I'm kapha,
right?
And then that's it. And
Right.
I forget how complex it could be, because as I've worked with Tara, I found that I had more of a pitta digestive system, and I was eating some of the wrong things because I was eating for kapha instead of for my digestive system.
And we find this over and over again. And in a part, it's like how Ayurveda has come into the West, and people get fixated on like, this is my type and this is my diet, and this is what I must do to be in this body this way. When really, that may not be what you need at this moment.
Mm-hmm. It's a great way to dip your toe into the water, but then we get to swim.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think it's funny and beautiful, because when we interviewed someone earlier, it was talking about yoga and all of the beautiful different types of yoga, karmic yoga and that kind of stuff that you don't actually hear about, and how, where we are today, it's mostly about asana yoga. And so this is just another example of that, where, in our lives, especially here in the US, where I think as a society cling to how we can define ourselves.
That's right.
Because we're searching so much for who am I? What am I here to do? All this kind of stuff. And so anything outside that we can put on ourselves as that label versus going inside to really figure out what it is, it makes it easier in a sense. And it kind of stops up that little desire for a little bit, because it's like, oh, I'm this, and I don't have to go too much further.
Yeah. And I feel like at least where we live, it feels very, we're scared to go below surface level. And so we touch the tips of so many different topics, with yoga and Ayurveda and all of these complex topics, and we just kind of touch the tip and then that's it.
I would even agree that it's probably also part of the distraction method we have.
Oh yeah.
Of not just because going too deep is deep and we don't want to deal with the shadows there, but also I think a lot of us nowadays have a difficulty going deep in general, just because we're constantly trying to distract ourselves.
Especially in this age of technology, not to get lost on a tangent, but
oh, those tangents. Well, I'm curious, because I know a little bit about, like you said, with the conception and all of that, it's defining your original dosha, essentially your blueprint, as you said. Would you say, because this is where I get a bit lost, is with Vedic astrology, is this coming at conception, or is this coming at birth, or both, or?
Right. So Vedic astrology is as per the birth moment. And this is a big conversation between Vedic astrologers and Ayurvedic practitioners. And they get really they can get really contentious about it, like back and forth. And there are Vedic astrologers who work in Ayurveda and vice versa. And like there's purists around it. From my perspective, the birth itself, there are certain markers in the chart that we can read that give us a lot of information about that person's doshas. Beyond that, we also get a lot of information about when and how someone might get ill or might get into an accident predictively. Beyond that, we can also, and some people use Vedic astrology predictively and some don't. Beyond that, we can also begin to see why certain karmic patterns unfold the way they do. Because, you know, yeah, if you do crystal meth every week, you're going to develop a vata imbalance. I pretty much guarantee it. And we know that that's a causative factor in creating too much dryness and nervous energy and nervous system overload, etc. All these things, dryness, and you're going to have teeth problems and it's going to go into the bones. But why does one person get in a horrible car accident? Or why is one person born with, you know, something that someone else isn't born with, right? For that, we can't see the causative factors in what they're doing. They're just living the life as best as they can. Not that the person on crystal meth is not living the life the best that they can, but it's hard to trace what are those causative factors of what has created this massive imbalance, right? And the Vedic chart begins to show us some of those influences and karmas that that person's soul has chosen to, in a sense, if we like to use the word choice, has really chosen to learn through and from in this lifetime. And so that's where the Vedic chart gives us this deeper wisdom and insight that we can't see from the pulse necessarily. You can't actually read the Vedic chart inside the pulse, which is very fascinating at the deepest level of the pulse, but we can't necessarily see those patterns, you know, on the tongue or in the face like that.
Can you also see someone's dosha? I think I've heard this, where to really find out your true original dosha, it's through Vedic astrology and where your chart is. That true? Is that where you would find that out?
There are different schools of thought about this. I use it as one very important marker that I'm assessing, in addition to other just basic visual assessments that are really like
I love that the way that you explain that, looking at the different what would you say, markers to see. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, so it's not just formulaic what I do, like I see this planet here in this house, therefore you are Pitta dosha. Like it's a bit more holistic.
What does your skin look like? What's your mind like? I love that you look at the holistic picture.
And I'm curious because I think I am someone who gets fixated on things very easily. That I can fully admit that. And I'm curious, for you, having all of this knowledge, you said, you know, you look at the voice and you look at the skin and like how a person is and that kind of stuff. As you're walking through your daily life, do you, like when you're talking to somebody, do you kind of like assess as you're looking at them or listening to them?
Yeah, I've had to learn to turn it off really consciously, because like it's especially on the level of the chakras, because we work also on the subtle body and the level of the chakras, and there are certain markers in posture, in how people hold themselves, that you can just tell so much intimate information about like their past 4 heartbreaks and like all of this kind of
want to sit up more.
No, I adjusted as well.
Like, hold on.
So anyhow, I really had to turn a lot of that off, because like, unless I'm really working with a client, because part of it is like, we can know too much, you know, that we don't need to mess with.
I'm curious about how you turn that off, because I feel like that's a hard thing to do.
It makes you think of being an empath as well. Like
yes, that's what I was connecting it to.
Yeah. I mean, it's very much connected to like, so all of these markers that we use in Ayurveda and Vedic astrology, I mean, Jyotish is the science of light. It's the eyes of the universe. And like being able to read that, so much of it, it's a science, and you learn and you study and you memorize, but then so much is like deeply intuitive of what comes to you after learning that knowledge. And same thing with Ayurveda, we just get a knowingness. And so in terms of turning it off, the best practices are regular meditation. And then, I work with a very specific process of Kundalini awakening, known as Kundalini awakening process, that I'm a teacher of also, that is some of the best tools for retaining your intuitive gifts and knowledge without taking on everything that you don't need to or don't want to. So that really helps with the overwhelm.
I love how you said science of light. That just was so beautiful. Because I think, as you said, Ayurveda is science of life.
Yes.
And so with that, I mean, it makes me want to think, like, go back to what each of the sciences are and like what they actually stand for, because that is beautiful how it describes each part of, our experience here.
Yeah.
You do so much, and I love hearing about all that you combine and how it's all combined together. How do you balance that? And I guess also, where do you choose to pick up, where I know a lot of times, at least for me, there are so many things I want to do, right? So many things that just come at you and you're like, that's so fun. But really honing in on what's important and what also is valuable for where you are now. How do you choose? What was it that, because you were starting off with dance and you shifted over here?
And I still practice specific forms of dance. So I like to describe myself as multi-passionate. At the same time, holding the center and holding the integrity of these practices is very personally important to me. And having a specific reservoir of knowledge that I'm working and playing with is also very important. And so it's like, I kind of know when I've gone, there'll always be more exploration, but when I've gone to the place I need to go with a specific system of knowledge, and really all of my interests really come back to how do we live in this body? Like, what is it about to be alive in an embodied form, right? No matter if it is dancing, it's an art form, but it's a very specific embodied art form. It's very different in many ways than the sculpture or the painting. It's also ephemeral. Like the fire ritual, it doesn't last forever, right? We do the fire and then it burns itself out. Just like, no matter our practice of Ayurveda, we live in the body and it inevitably dies. So I think of all of it in many ways, it's almost like performance art. Like,
I could see that. For those who I don't think I've ever said, I have a degree in theater performance studies. And so
cool.
That's like up my alley as well.
Yeah.
And I can definitely see, I never actually thought of Ayurveda as an art form in that sense. And that is very beautiful, because that's what you're embodying. And, within the space that you're creating. How would you say you do that with a child? Because it's so personal and so profound. And, you try to teach them, but also it's their kids.
For me, like, it's been like, I try not to like force anything on within reason, but I'm not like, it's time to do your yoga practice. But like when my kid was little and they would always give me a poop report, and they'd be like, I think I'm developing a bit of ama. I'd be like, yes. Or they'd like look at their tongue. They'd look at their tongue and they'd be like, I think I'm developing a bit of heat, like I feel like, yes, this is great, and so it's just like that leading by example, I think.
And they're sponges. They absorb what you're doing and what you're embodying.
That's right.
That's something as I'm learning more about Ayurveda, that I was talking with my husband about, is about keeping a poop journal for all of my boys. And there's 4 of us. And so it's like, I haven't started it yet, but where I want to, we go through and we discuss, they just are watching it, because I know at the age that I am, 32, I'm just now looking at, how that looks, and like, no,
and how important it is.
You don't learn about it. And
okay, do you want to hear something really shocking? Do you know what the Western definition of constipation is?
No.
You have not gone to the bathroom for 2 weeks.
Ow.
That sounds like
only at that point are you considered constipated as per Western medicine. Which I think Western medicine is great and totally useful in certain circumstances, but that I'm like, whoa,
Well, it makes me think of whenever I had my miscarriages, and I had 2 of them, and they actually don't do tests until you have 3 miscarriages. They don't look into that until you have 3 of them. It's like, oh, there's something actually going on here. And I'm like, why?
Go ahead.
I think, why would you, for someone who, at the time I had 3 boys, and so I didn't have to necessarily go through that, but for someone who's wanting children and hasn't had that, 1, 2 is enough. Like, that's enough. You shouldn't have to go through a 3rd to then see, okay, well, now it's worthy to dive into.
I was just going to say, I feel like Western medicine is very, we're not very preventative, right? We're very good when it comes to surgery and saving a life, but everything before that point's kind of blah.
And for emergencies, is we're really we really need it. It's great. It's amazing. But in terms of knowing how to live, it's not very great.
Well, there was something I once heard, and I'm not sure how true this is, but I had read somewhere that Ayurvedic doctors, or maybe just doctors a while back before it shifted, were actually paid to have healthy patients. And
actually, traditionally Vedic Vaidya's Ayurvedic doctors would get paid when everybody was healthy.
Which is
it's a huge
totally
incentive,
different.
right? Keep everybody, I get paid.
It's like, in where we are here, it's for birthing, the person who catches the baby. So, no wonder certain women, they ask you to hold, or they schedule C-sections because to get paid, it's that. And so I love how it's the incentive to be healthy versus coming to you afterwards, definitely. Would you say that, actually, I'm going to reword this. What would you say is your dharma with this then? With you having all of these that you've kind of tied in together, do you associate with dharma specifically? And how would you say that kind of guides you, if you do?
Yeah. Well, there are specific markers for one's dharma in the Vedic chart that really tell us a lot about what we are doing here, and we can see it and read it very, very clearly. And when someone is in resonance with that dharma, then they feel really good. So I'm not sure.
So you're saying it's something kind of like what our soul has, quote unquote, chosen, in a sense?
Not well, perhaps, but more specifically, it's like where your soul is at that moment and what is unfolding in that lifetime specific for you. And one way we look at this, is through the nakshatra, the star sign of the moon. The nakshatras are 27 star signs that have very strong importance in Vedic astrology. And so when we know the nakshatra of the moon, the placement of the moon specifically within this, within the sign itself, we know a great deal about what that journey of that hero and hero's journey is through the lifetime, and what their soul's blueprint, if you will, is to do. And the nakshatras are a little mysterious. They're the shaktis of the sign. They're the female powers of the sign. And they really have very potent iconography, very potent symbols for each one of the nakshatras that give a great deal of information about who that person is and what they are here to experience.
So kind of what I'm hearing is, in a sense, it's like your soul's evolution, because it goes through different evolutions. That's the only word I can think of to tie it in.
Precisely.
And I kind of see that as in a connection with Western, like they say, where you're, what is it, Alyssa, where you're coming and where you're going. What are those signs?
You're talking about your moon and your rising?
No, there's one that you go even further, and it's if you go through your chart, it's supposed to be like where you're. I can't think of what it's called now. But like as you're going through, it says like where you were kind of in your past life, and like where you were coming from and where you're going, and that's kind of what it makes. What you're saying makes me think of.
Yeah, we can see those things too.
I'm sure you can see much more in depth. And something I don't think that we fully explained is the difference between this and Western. Can you kind of give a brief summary of that?
Yeah. I think the easiest way, which is not completely precise, but it's the way that works in my mind, is that Western astrology is in essence accurate to what was actually in the sky 2,000 years ago. And when the Greeks learned astrology from what is now called Hinduism, Sanatana Dharma, they didn't learn, or they forgot to learn, about the progression of the equinoxes, about how the whole system itself is moving, right? And so it's fixed. And in many ways, Western astrology is like energetic and seasonally useful. We can say that spring starts with Aries and it has that like forward push. However, the sun is not in Aries at the beginning of spring. It just is not there anymore. It was there 2,000 years ago. And so for me personally, the Vedic system makes so much more sense and is more accurate in terms of looking at someone's specific lifetime, and also looking at what's happening globally, what's happening cosmically, what's happening energetically. So that's the difference in a nutshell.
I love that. That was a very succinct explanation. Thank you. And for something that's so vast. And I did remember it's the North nodes and South nodes within Western astrology, that what you were saying. And I think, because I was just talking about this today with my mother about the time changes and all of those things that are kind of like put on us now. And you're very much right that we've been kind of taught to believe that the solstices happen at these exact times every single year. These days mark it. And even then, the idea of there being 13 months instead of 12 months, that has been condensed because of the moon cycle. And it's kind of disconnected us a bit from our bodies to not really tune in. I think, technically where I feel right now is that spring's kind of already come, but if you look at the calendar, that's not true. And so you aren't, it's not promoting the tapping in as much.
Yeah, well, I'm not, I think for many people, they're very invested and enjoy very much Western astrology. But, like in Western astrology, my sun is in Cancer. And in Vedic astrology, we don't really, the sun is very important, but it's not necessarily as important as the ascendant or the moon. That said, in Vedic astrology, my sun is in Gemini. And so it's completely different.
Would you say that the terms that define each sign are still the same, even if they are different signs? Or are they still, or like they differ?
The energies are absolutely the same, and some of the core qualities are absolutely the same. the archetypes and myths that go with the signs and with the planets are a bit different. And the whole system of Vedic astrology, or much of it, is based on the 27 star signs, which are the stars beyond the signs themselves. And really, without an understanding of the nakshatras, the star signs, we can't really have a strong understanding of Vedic astrology. So, and then there are many, many calculations that are so much more precise, like the D20 chart, for example, is a calculation that changes every what we call the Vimshasha. It changes every 6 minutes. So like if your birth time isn't very accurate, at that level of refinement, we won't be able to see things correctly. And then there are systems of rectifying people's charts to find the correct time that they were born.
That's very interesting. I once heard a good description of it being that Western is more of like what you put yourself out there in our world right now, versus Vedic would be more of like who you really are in your soul, and like who you are wanting to be and who you're wanting to show up as, but maybe don't feel as comfortable being. I'm sure that's a good definition.
Yeah. When I teach on Vedic astrology, or I work with, when I read a chart, or I'm working with someone, I'm like, if you want to compare this to Western astrology, you can do it on your own time, because I'm not gonna do that.
That's fair.
I'm just not gonna go there. Like to me, it's like it's just a totally different system. And for me, that's the system that I use. That's the tool.
I am curious where you fall in with the sun sign being for Western, and then for Vedic, and how you connect with each of those. If you really think that, like, I'm assuming that you think you're Vedic and you connect more with your Vedic.
Yeah. Well, like I said, the sun is of somewhat less importance in Vedic astrology than it
Would
is
you
in
say
Western.
the Saturn return is more important in Vedic?
The so-called Saturn return, Sadi Shani, Shani Sadi, sorry, doesn't happen at a prescribed time in Vedic astrology, like you hit 18 years old or 28, or like whatever it is, I forget what it is. So it will happen uniquely throughout someone's life. And that is quite important. But the more important markers that we're always looking at are the ascendant, and the ascendant is of really utmost importance, and the moon, the lunar placement.
I feel like I need to dive into Vedic astrology after this.
Yeah.
Or basically ask her to help us. That's what I'm feeling. And something that just was kind of interesting to me, I don't know if you've heard this book or read it, The Path of the Priestess. It's your story at the very beginning really reminded me of this story at the beginning of Path of the Priestess, of how she went through and went to India with basically as a dancer, and then was realizing that she was connecting to Shakti and all of that. And it's just
I haven't read it.
As you were saying it, I had to actually second guess and be like, did she write that book? Like, hold on. But it reminds me of how we are all connected and have very similar experiences, and are, that one of the whole of how I think within our society, we're so caught up on being individual and being separate. And when it comes to being connected, it almost feels like we have to be this exact way to be connected to somebody else, instead of just seeing a person and seeing their energy and for who they are, and just feeling we're this, not needing to be so separate, I think.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for walking us through this. And I feel like it was a very brief way to look at a vast few sciences, actually, right? Because we discussed both. And do you have a place that you could recommend someone for trying to dive in? I mean, there's a usual place with you can go take your dosha quiz here, like that kind of stuff. But for someone who really wants to understand more? Do you have a way to to guide them into just
Yeah,
taking the
Vedic
step?
astrology is so rich and so deep that you can really fall into some wormholes with it, even more so than Ayurveda, like Ayurveda. And so, and there are many wonderful, amazing teachers of Jyotish. And at the minimum, like the very basic knowledge is a year-long to 2-year-long course. That's like the ground level, right, of understanding. For the students who study yoga and who have studied yogic philosophy, there's a book by Sam Jeppy, who has been one of my teachers of Vedic astrology, called Yoga and Vedic Astrology. And it's very interesting. For students of yoga, they'll have familiarity with the terminology of yoga, and then it provides an entry into understanding Vedic astrology, and it really shows the connection between the two sciences. So that's one place that people can start. I do new moon and full moon circles from a perspective of Vedic astrology every month. And so for those, I go through like, where is the moon right now? What's the star sign that the moon is in? What is that energy that's coming in right now? And then what are the things that we should be aware of? What are the energetic things we should be aware of? And then I also offer like kriyas or meditations specific to what's happening right now. Beyond those two recommendations, I can certainly recommend teachers of Vedic astrology. And I do know, and I'm not really active there, but I do believe, according to one of my friends, colleagues, and students, there's some like amazing clubhouse rooms on Vedic astrology with amazing teachers who go in there and like teach Vedic astrology from the ground up, like from beginning to end for free.
Wow.
And she has learned she's an extremely good Jyotishi at this point, and most of her knowledge has come from Clubhouse and then from those teachers like blogs and stuff. That's not been my pathway, but it's certainly like one way in if you are on that platform.
And as you say, you have these what sounds like amazing new moon and full moon circles that I have to hear more about later, because that just sounds so beautiful.
Yes.
Would you say that, because you're giving this, where the energy is right now based on the sign, that kind of stuff, is it able to be more direct in those? Because I know with Western astrology, it's like, oh, here's the moon, but it has to apply to here and where you are and here and here and here. Is that kind of how it is as well with Vedic? Or is it more of like, this is the energy and you can really take in more so?
Well, it's always like, how is it affecting the energy? But then it's also like what we are sitting in right now. For example, this last new moon that just happened, all of the planets were stacked up in two signs, Capricorn and Aquarius, which happened to be the root chakra, the cosmic root chakra. They're all stacked up in the Muladhara chakra. So shaking up all this feeling of anxiety and fear and pressure and all of this like intense energy that's actually ruled over by the energy of the goddess Kali. So like how it's personally affecting you is going to be specific to you, but just with that knowledge, like we can do kriyas, mantras, meditations, mudras in the energy of Kali, and then create some internal shifts, so at least we aren't acting and reacting under that specific pressure of that energy that's right here and right now.
I love that.
Me too.
I didn't even know there was a cosmic root either.
I didn't either.
So check it out. This is really cool, right? The Vedic astrology works with 7 planets, the 7 visible planets: Sun, Moon, Mercury, Mars, Venus, Jupiter, Saturn. That's it. None of the outer planets, right? The Sun and Moon get 1 sign each. All of the other planets get 2 signs each. That makes 12 signs, right? Sun and Moon are the 2 petals of the third eye, the Ajna chakra. All the other signs and planets rule over different chakras. Venus ruling over Taurus, and ruling over Libra is the cosmic heart chakra, for example. Yeah. And so knowing that, we can know all of this information about how things are specifically affecting you. Beyond that, the 27 star signs relate to the 108 petals of the 7 chakras. And so you know what star sign the moon is in right now. You can chant the mantra of that petal of that particular chakra and create an opening. It's very beautiful.
Wow.
That is. And it feels more embodied than just here's information, go, it feels like you're able to actually feel it in your body. You're and as you say, like with the mudras and that kind of thing, that's oh, I have to sit with that after here.
Yeah, I'm gonna have a lot of deep thinking.
I blew your mind.
Yes,
I love it.
Yes. And then my other question is, for those who do want to go on the Ayurveda path or so, would you recommend going to India to really learn about that? Or do you think studying it in the US is beneficial as well?
Oh, I think it's absolutely beneficial. And, I really do believe that when you're ready, the correct teacher and the correct teachings will appear to you and it will be easy. Like sometimes we have to overcome things. I'm not saying that. And sometimes we have to overcome things internally or financially or energetically. And we have to take the leap and it has to be scary. And sometimes that happens, but also there are amazing teachers here and now, and we're so fortunate to be able to connect to people all over the world here and now via the interweb. So don't create it as this thing in your mind that you'll only get the authentic, genuine if you go to the source. Because I also know people who have gone to India and tried to train in Ayurveda, and they've been incredibly frustrated because of a whole variety of reasons, and that might be your experience. It might not, you might have it just depends upon where you are at that particular
Trust your
moment.
intuition.
Exactly.
What you feel you need.
Exactly right. And that resonance with who is the vehicle that is teaching you. I have a lot of I've got a lot of interest in cults and how they develop and why they develop. And so I'm very cult phobic. And so really sit with that intuitive knowing about who are you learning from and why are they teaching you and how are they teaching you and with what integrity are they teaching you? And they should be able to answer some clear questions about, what it is that they are teaching. And from what stream did they find their knowledge? And even if that is a received stream from a ascended master or an angel, I don't care. They should be able to articulate, this is where I received it from, right? Or what is this transmission? So that you can choose then, am I stepping into that stream or not?
I love how you said that. Of when you're ready, when the time's right, your teacher will show, in a sense, and that's very true. Well, Alyssa, do you have a challenge for us on this one? I feel like this is a very deep one to try to
digest. I feel like
no,
I don't know that there's a specific challenge.
I do have a challenge that I would say is to begin to. We just challenge you in a fun way to look into Vedic astrology and to kind of, I feel like Ayurveda is talked more about right now. And so just as we've talked about both, to just kind of look into Vedic astrology. And we're obviously going to link Justine in the
show notes.
Thank you. And where you can learn from her as well. But I think just always looking at new ways of thinking is a fun way to expand your mind.
Yeah, beautiful.
Thank you so much for joining us, Justine. We appreciate having you here.
I'm so glad to join you both. It was my pleasure and an honor, and I really appreciate you having me on.
This concludes another episode of our Weaving Magick podcast.
We release one episode a week, so be sure to subscribe to catch the latest episode as soon as it releases. You can find us on Instagram at Weaving Magick Podcast. That's Weaving Magick, Magick Podcast.
We would also love it if you could leave us a review. If you do, make sure to email us your review so we can send you a thank you gift. Thank you so much for joining us, and don't forget to find a way to weave magic into your daily life.